Saturday, and 9:30 is usually an early start for people like me from Delhi. So congratulations for all of you to make it to the function at 9:30 in the morning. My name is Chakshu. I work at PRS Legislative Research in Delhi. What PRS does is fairly simple. PRS provides non-partisan research to members of parliament across the different political parties. This is a service which is unique in India. No other organization provides it, and we've been doing it for the last 7 years. Besides providing research to members of parliament, what we also do is we track the work that is being done by parliament as an institution and also by members of parliament as legislators. So how much time is parliament functioning, how many bills does it pass, how many days does it function, are the MPs attending parliament or not, are they asking questions, are they participating in debates. So those are roughly some of the things that I do. This morning's session that I'm taking, I'll try and make it as interesting as possible. Since this is IIT, I thought I should come prepared with some numbers and not some empty slides. So I've put together some numbers for you. I hope you would like that. I'd kick off by a small civics lesson because today we are discussing the Sansad Ratna Awards, and it's all about who asked how many questions, who attended parliament, who did not attend parliament, and then celebrating the top performers. So just to give you an idea as to, on a regular day, how does parliament function. Usually they don't teach this in our civics books. Interestingly, the only thing that they teach us in the civics books when we are class 9th or 10th is Lok Sabha has X number of members, X number of them are nominated, 2 are from the Anglo-Indian community, so on and so forth. But what happens in parliament, how does it actually function, is something that's usually overlooked. So parliament has a set starting time. It does not start before 11 o'clock every morning. So both the houses of parliament, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, start at 11 o'clock in the morning. Lok Sabha finishes off at 6 o'clock in the evening, and the Rajya Sabha finishes off at 5 o'clock in the evening. Roughly the state legislative assemblies also function in a similar manner. They have a starting time and an ending time, but different assemblies have different starting and ending times depending on the geographical region that they're based in. So for example, the state where I come from, which is Haryana, the legislative assembly starts working at 2 o'clock in the afternoon rather than in the morning. In Andhra Pradesh, for example, I know that the legislative assembly starts working at 8:30 in the morning. So this is how parliament kicks off. 11 o'clock in the morning it starts. And the first agenda item on business is question hour. So the first hour of parliament is question hour in both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. This is the time that members of parliament asks the government questions about the work that is being done by the ministries. Right? Now these questions can be of 2 types. They can be starred questions and unstarred questions. And we have an esteemed member who knows starred and unstarred questions, but I will still explain. Starred questions are questions which ministers answer orally in the House. So I'm a minister, I'll stand up and you're an MLA or an MP and you'll ask me a question, I'm bound to respond to it. The advantage of asking an oral question is that after I give you a response, you can also ask me a supplementary question as a rebuttal. The unstarred question is when you ask a question and the response to that question is sent to you in writing. Right? So those are the 2 types of questions. Question hour only deals with the starred questions. Unstarred questions are given to you as a written answer between 11 and 12 in the morning. Now what is interesting is sometimes people think that that's all there is to question hour. You give a question and it will be answered by the government. It is not so simple. So what happens is not every question that a member of parliament puts up for asking in parliament is answered. So between 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock, only 20 questions are listed for answering. 20 starred questions are listed for answering, and 250 unstarred questions are listed for written answers. So how does Parliament decide as to which question is important and needs to be answered and which does not need to be answered. So Parliament does not take a call on what is important and what is not important. What it does is, let us say today is Monday, right? So all the questions that are supposed to be answered today are put into a computerized ballot, and then the computer on a random basis picks out 20 questions which will be answered, right? And then this is done for the 5 days of the week when Parliament is functioning, right? So this raises another question, which is, do ministers get a chance to study about these questions in advance, or they come in the morning and they're given a list of 20 questions that they need to answer? No. Ministers, these questions are supposed, if a question has to be answered today, that question has to be given to Parliament at least 10 days in advance, so that you can go to the ministry and the concerned minister, and the minister can prepare a response. I'm not too sure if you remember, some years ago there was this sting operation by a news channel which said that they had paid off members of Parliament some money for questions to be raised in Parliament. Right? While I will not comment on the merits of the sting operation, but there is no foolproof way of ensuring that you can pay money to an MP or an MLA and have that question answered within Parliament. And the reason for that is that the number of questions that come in, so for example, Lok Sabha is for 545 MPs, you take about 40 MPs which are ministers, because ministers don't ask questions. Everybody else is allowed to ask a question. So if 500 people put in one question each for a particular day, and the ballot is only for, and the lottery is only for 20 questions, you have to be extremely lucky to have your question picked up. So there's one way to game the system, which is instead of putting one question, you put 10 questions, right? Because then your chances increase of having, because you bought more tickets into the lottery. But Parliament prevents that by saying that you can't ask more than 2 questions, or you can't put into more than 2 questions in the box. So fairly foolproof system. I've seen it working for the last 7 years and I haven't seen a problem with it. But that's what happens in question hour. The reason question hour is important is because this is a mechanism where members of Parliament cutting across party lines will ask very tough questions of ministers. So if you as a member of Parliament want to find out if there are schools in your particular district, you'll ask the HRD minister the number of schools in your district as compared to other districts, or the performance of the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, and so on and so forth, and the minister has to respond to that. Interestingly, just because you're a ruling party member of Parliament, it does not mean that you will not ask questions. Ruling party MPs or opposition MPs will ask equally tough questions of the ministers. Party politics does not come into play during the question hour. Moving on, the next hour of Parliament is called zero hour. If you look at the books of parliamentary procedure, they don't really say there's anything called zero hour, but it's by convention it's called zero hour. And the reason for calling it zero hour is because it starts at 12 o'clock and the clock is set to 0. Something as simple as that. Zero hour is very, very interesting because Parliament is a very, very structured body. You, unlike what you see on the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha television, where you see members of Parliament standing up and protesting spontaneously, Parliament is anything but spontaneous, other than the protest part of it. To speak in Parliament, you have to give advance notice for everything. So, for example, as I said, to speak in question hour, you have to submit questions at least 10 days in advance. To speak on a budget or to speak on a legislation, to participate in a debate, you have to give your name in advance. Usually a week or 5 days or 10 days, depending on the type of thing that you want to do. But zero hour is unique. What zero hour allows you to do is, it allows a member of Parliament to raise matters of urgent public importance without giving notice. So, for example, if something happens in Madras today, the Madras MP does not have the time to give a notice and then wait for 10 days for it to come up. If he wants to highlight that issue immediately in front of the nation and in front of his fellow members of parliament, he can use 0 hour. So 0 hour is a little unstructured. There are some elements of structure to it over the years, but there are some unstructured elements. But what you see on television and what I see on television is mostly the unstructured part of it, where you see a lot of slogan shouting happening. 0 hour again, sometimes is used to highlight political issues, as we have seen in the past. But the way it is designed, or the intent of 0 hour, was to actually raise issues regarding your constituency or regarding your state. That was the intent. But then comes lunch in Parliament, 1 to 2 o'clock. And this is what newspapers love to report as to how Railway has a lovely little canteen in Parliament which is subsidized, and you get a full meal for 5 rupees or something like that sort. Not true at all, but Parliament usually skips through lunch. And the reason for that is not that they're not hungry, but that Parliament's not a jail, right? There is no compulsion on a member of Parliament to sit inside the House till the time the lunch break occurs, right? I mean, they are free to come in and go out as and when they please. So usually Parliament works through lunch. If and when people want to go and eat something, they do that. But technically nothing is reserved at this time for any work to be done. So if I have to divide the day of Parliament, the division happens between 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock. From 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock, a member of Parliament usually does work as an individual member of Parliament. His party identity does not come into play, right? So rules of anti-defection, whips by political parties usually do not come into play till 2 o'clock. And this completely changes after 2 o'clock. From 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock in Lok Sabha and 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock in Rajya Sabha is when government business happens. Now, government business is usually of 3 kinds. Government is either trying to pass a law, right, or it's trying to pass a budget, or it's trying to have a debate or a discussion on a matter which concerns the nation. So, for example, if the petrol price is raised, right, and there has to be a discussion on it, or there has to be a discussion on inflation, it will happen between 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, right? If the budget of the country has to be passed, it will happen between 2 to 5 or 2 to 6, right? If the Lokpal bill has to be passed, this is the time that it will be passed. During this time, members of Parliament are no longer individual members of Parliament. Now they become members of Parliament who represent parties and party ideologies. So they don't speak for themselves, they speak for or on behalf of their parties. That's the general idea. This scheme roughly works Monday to Friday. Parliament does not sit on Saturday and Sundays. And there's just one small variation that happens is on Fridays. Government business does not happen between 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock. Fridays is reserved for something called private member business. So if you look at your handout, there is a category in which the awardees has been graded under private member bills as to the number of private member bills that they have raised. In India and in a number of different parliamentary democracies, the government can also introduce laws that can be passed, but individual member of Parliament can also introduce a law that he or she thinks is important that needs to be passed, right? And they do that on a Friday. So that's there. This is something that I'm going to talk about later, but I'll quickly run through this. So members of Parliament have a different, the Constitution envisages a certain type of role for them, and that role is they need to keep the government on account, right? I mean, they need to figure out as to what the government is doing and how it is doing that work, and they use the question hour to do that. They need to represent the people. That's another function. We are a representative democracy. They have been elected by people. So they do the representation function by raising issues in 0 hour. They are supposed to make laws and pass budget, and that's what happens post-lunch during the 2 to 5 or 2 to 6 period. So this is a normal day in Parliament. And now that I've taken 20 minutes to explain this to you, I have a small question. How many days do you think Parliament sits in a year? Straw poll, we can raise hand, shout out answer. 60%. Okay, she's part of the organizing committee, so I'm not going to take her answer. but some rough estimates? 80 to 90 days? Okay? 100 days? Sorry? Who said 6 months? 6 months, okay. Quite a variation, I mean. 40 days a session? Okay. Okay, so I'll just quickly go to this. This is the number of days that Parliament's been sitting from 1952 when the first Parliament started till 2012. The red line is Rajya Sabha days of sitting, and the green line is the Lok Sabha days of sitting, right? Now, you notice that during the first golden years of our democracy, we were averaging 120 odd days of sitting of Parliament. Thereafter, you see that sharp dip. That's the emergency that you see there. Roughly in the 1970s region, there's a sharp dip that you see. And thereafter, the number of days that Parliament has been working has been declining and declining. Any idea as to why this has been happening? Yeah, but disruptions does not stop you from calling Parliament, right? I mean, that would be different. You come to work, but you don't work, but you still mark your attendance, right? So two things. One is, some of the regular dips that you see are actually election years, right? These dips are at a very regular interval, because in an election year, 4 months goes into preparing and doing the general election. So you can't hold Parliament during that time. The one reason as to why Parliament does not meet is, who do you think is responsible for calling Parliament to session? The Speaker? The President, right? So actually it is the President who decides when Parliament has to convene and has to start working in the different sessions. And as civics book have taught us, another one very standard line which all students in CBSE is, President is a rubber stamp, right? That's what they, I mean, anything that you need to remember about President is that the President is a rubber stamp. Now the President acts on the aid and advice of the Union Council of Ministers. Right? Now, we were discussing earlier that it is Parliament which is supposed to keep a track of the work done by the government, right? But to ensure that Parliament can do that function, the Prime Minister and his cabinet colleagues decide as to when will Parliament meet and keep a check on them, right? It's a very simple, if I need to explain it in absolute simple terms, if there's a school and there's a principal, right, and the school students have to be monitored by the principal, it is the school students who decide as to when the principal comes to work. That's the position. So the government of the day decides when will Parliament come and meet and keep scrutiny on the government. So over the years, successive governments have decided that maybe it's not really a good idea to have Parliament working for 120 or 140 days. So that's one explanation. The other explanation is, somewhere after the 1990s, the committee system in Parliament started functioning. Committees are what is called mini parliaments. So when the committee started functioning, it was decided that maybe not enough number of days were required for Parliament to function. So this is roughly a 60-year history of what a Parliament's been doing and how many days it's been meeting. Coming to another graph. So if it's meeting for a very limited number of days, how much business or how much laws is it able to pass in each one of those years? Can somebody interpret this graph for me? This is the number of laws that Parliament passes every year. So if you look at this graph, those dips are fairly explanatory as to the fact as to why those dips are happening. But can somebody explain that skyscraper there? Emergency, right? Because during emergency we decided that, oh, you know what, even though Parliament meets for a very limited number of days, we can quickly get as many bills out as possible. The number of legislation that we as Parliament pass is going down. Now in itself it does not mean anything because if we have to logically look at this graph, we can interpret it in two ways. We can say that making more laws is not a good idea, right? So if it's declining, it's okay, right? Or we can interpret it the fact that maybe the country needs more laws, right? So more laws need to be made, in which case it's not such a good graph to look at. I'm going to quickly come back to here, right? And I'm going to ask you a very simple question. When all of you were coming into this conference hall, did you have to sign a registration sheet of some kind saying that you're attending the session today? Right. Parliament has roughly a similar system for keeping attendance of members of Parliament. So before you enter the Lok Sabha lobby or the Rajya Sabha main precinct, there are registers kept outside with alphabetical demarcations. So you come, you find your name, you sign a register, and you go inside Lok Sabha. And that is counted as a present for you for that day. Right? But as I said, nobody stops you from signing the register and not going in, or signing the register and going in for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 hours. Right? Now I'm going to show you the next graph, which talks about the attendance of members of Parliament in the 15th Lok Sabha, which started in 2009 and which is hopefully going to end in 2014. So roughly the average number of days that a member of Parliament attends Parliament is about 78%. Right? The average attendance is 78%. There are a number of members of Parliament who have close to either a 99% attendance record. I'm not too sure if there's 100%, but 99% attendance record is something that I've seen. The reason I wanted to put this graph rather than anything else was sometimes we have very popular perceptions, right? That certain parties would automatically be doing well, right? So nobody would anticipate that a BSP and a Samajwadi Party members of Parliament would be attending Parliament so often because sometimes they are the members of Parliament who are involved in disruptions. So this is a graph across different political parties as to how much time, how much is the attendance, are they going to Parliament or not? And the good news is that our members of Parliament are actually going to Parliament and attending Parliament. Right? One of the criteria for today's awards is attendance of members of Parliament, the diligence in attending the House. Any questions regarding this? Can I come back to the very end? Just this slide. There is one known instance. Since this is an academic institution, I'm assuming it's a very valid question to ask. There is apparently one known instance of a possible proxy, but those were difficult times. Sometime during emergency, Mr. Subramaniam Swamy was a member of Parliament, right? And Parliament record suggests that he did not attend Parliament for an X number of days. Now, according to the Constitution of India, if you don't attend Parliament for 60 days in a row, you lose your parliamentary seat. So Mr. Subramanian Swamy was outside India and he was making speeches, and this is not me saying it, it's part of what was given in the Parliament report. So there were 3 days left for that 60-day period to happen, when the period would have been completed and he would have lost his seat. But it was found that somebody had scribbled a signature in front of his name, marking his attendance. And a number of his fellow members of parliament said that he was not seen in the house on those 3 days. So how was his signature there? So, as I said, those were difficult times. That was the period of the emergency when this had happened, right? So we are not too sure as to what happened and what did not happen. जी जी Madam, you're absolutely right? But Parliament is a body. It's not a school or a college. You can't force somebody to sit in the house because they're. Absolutely correct. To conclude my answer to your question, so he was stripped of his seat in Parliament, right? But as I said, those were difficult times. The parliamentary record suggests so, but other than that, there has been no instance of quote-unquote proxy, right? I have a little limitation of time, so what I'll do is I'll quickly go through my slides, and I think I see a fair amount of interest in the crowd, so we'll take some questions later. The other slide I wanted to put together was as to how many questions are members of parliament asking, right? Because that's another criteria which has been used in the awards. And I think there's a fair amount of questions that are being asked by members of parliament. Shiv Sena, which is a small party, I think just on the basis has done a commendable job in asking so many questions. Again, this shows two things. One is that there are certain members of parliament who are taking the effort to actually put questions on a daily basis for different types of ministries, right? Because if you are not diligent about asking questions, you will not favor in the ballot. The ballot favors only the law of averages apply. The more questions you ask, the more chances that your questions will get picked up, right? But again, something that you'll see is that the ruling party has many lesser questions, maybe justifiably so, because they don't need to ask so many questions to get the work done. But this is roughly the trend about questions. And the average question that a regular member of parliament asks is 255. And before you actually ask me as to how many questions Rahul Gandhi asked, he hasn't asked too many questions. I know that comes up very often. So you're right.
That 569 for the Shiv Sena.
Yes.
What about the number? Total member calculation. The Shiv Sena member is very bigger. But the total number of Congress party, BJP is अधिक.
So we've averaged it out. So based on the party strength, we've averaged the numbers out.
You understand that?
Yes.
That only small peoples are, small amount of peoples are there. Only number is very less.
That's correct. Absolutely.
But number is high here.
Yeah.
But how this average you are placing this here? Because we have to find out, we have to see the number also.
Absolutely.
Then only the average will be
Correct.
suitable.
Absolutely. That's
yeah. People are signing in the BJP, Shiv Sena. It will be all right. Your calculation is all right. But even then, what about the quantum of the people?
Absolutely correct, sir. That's a very valid point. So what we've done is we've averaged these numbers out according to the size of the party, right? So it says average number of questions rather than the actual number of questions, right? Clearly, the actual number of questions would be much more because there are more members of parliament in a particular party. I'm happy to share much more detailed data about these and other indicators should be so required. This is just a summary of things that is there. I just wanted to come back over those two things. Is if you generally ask somebody as to what is the role of an MP, these are roughly a selection of the answers that you get. Right? बच्चे का job लगवाना है, admission, transfer, can you get a road made or an electricity pole put outside my house? These are roughly the representation of the questions that people ask their members of parliament or think that the member of parliament should be doing. But that's not what the constitution thinks. According to the Constitution of India, members of parliament only have a fourfold job. They're supposed to make laws, that's why they're called legislators. They're supposed to keep an eye on the working of the government. How's the government working? How are they spending its money? They're supposed to pass the budget for the country, and they're supposed to represent the people who elected them. These are the four mandates that are given to a legislator. And that's why, when I showed you the day in Parliament, I categorized the day into these four functions. As our esteemed guest would point out, that this is very theoretical, right? This is to a certain extent, a Rajya Sabha member's viewpoint of how politics should be done. Because if this is what a Lok Sabha member of parliament did, there is no way that he'll get elected to parliament again, right? So to some extent, this is very, very theoretical. But this is what the Constitution says, and maybe to a certain extent, the responsibility on us as citizens is not to knock on the door of a member of parliament and keep saying, can you get my child transferred, or you can get a son a job, right? Because that's an unnecessary burden on his or her time, which they are not supposed to do. But moving on, so this is what they're supposed to do. This is a graph of the number of papers that a member of parliament gets, right? Now, I said that they ask questions, right? I said that they participate in budget debates, they participate in legislative debates. Now, for them to participate in all these debates, they have to read documents. And the government, what it does is, at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, tables on the floor of the house a number of documents. It makes public certain documents, which ideally every member of parliament should read and be prepared. There are reports, government reports that come out, there are JPC reports that come out. They're supposed to read and be prepared. In the 14th Lok Sabha, on average, there were about 1,400 documents which were laid on the table of the House in every session. 1,400 documents. Now, my limited experience, and there are a number of very eminent and experienced people in this room who would vouch for the fact that the government does not believe in brevity. It does not write short documents, right? I mean, sometimes people take it personally when undersecretary puts up a file and which is the file is only slightly thinner, and they said, please fatten it up a little bit. It needs to look authentic, right? All of that gets translated into debate. These are the number of documents that get tabled in Parliament. And this is what members of Parliament are supposed to read to be prepared for a day in Parliament, so that they can ask the right kind of questions, they can make the right kind of points. People say that, how can our members of Parliament be reading all these papers? Because clearly politicians are supposed to be uneducated, right? I mean, that's a normal middle class belief that people have, that members of Parliament are not very educated. In fact, members of Parliament are extremely educated. If you look at this graph, about 80% of our Parliament has graduate degrees. About another 18% is postgraduate degrees or professional degrees. Right? So Parliament is fairly educated. So it's clearly capable of dealing with the huge amount of documents that are coming in that it needs to scrutinize. But what is the kind of infrastructure do we provide to members of Parliament to deal with this kind of work? Right? So while newspapers might point out a number of things about as to how members of Parliament get a free house in Delhi, what they will not point out to you is that members of Parliament do not have an office in Delhi. Right? they usually have to work out of their home, so they don't have an office, right? So they have a computer, they have a secretary who takes meetings for them and stuff, but the secretary works out of their home. If you're a senior member of parliament, you get a bungalow. But most members of parliament stay in apartment blocks in Delhi, closer to parliament, but still flats, right? There is no research staff, right? Today, I'm a lawyer, right? So my expertise is in understanding nuances of law. But in parliament, not only legal questions comes up, sometimes, sales tax questions come up, right? Or when the finance minister is talking about income tax provisions, taxation things come up. 2008, we had a big thing of nuclear energy coming up. Now to imagine that every member of parliament is an expert in every subject that will come before parliament is unthinkable, right? You can be an engineer, but then you can't understand the plight of farmers, right? So what members of parliament need is research staff, professional research staff, which will do research for them on any number of given topics, so that a member of parliament can make up their mind that whether this is good for the country or this is bad for the country, right? So that they can actually go through those heaps of documents that are sent to them every day and make sense out of it and keep the government accountable. But we haven't really provided that for members of parliament. To a certain extent, I think we as citizens are to blame for it, because every time we try to give members of parliament certain facilities, there's a huge outcry in the newspapers. Oh, members of parliament are getting free air tickets, right? Which is the first thing that newspapers point out, that members of parliament are getting free air tickets. I'm visiting from Delhi for this presentation. I haven't paid out of my own pocket to come in. My organization is paying for it. So if a member of parliament has to go from his constituency into Delhi, it's not a free air ticket to go anywhere, right? I mean, they go from constituency to Delhi and back, right? Or to go on an official visit. So that's not an unnecessary. So every time we try and raise allowances for members of parliament so that they can hire staff or hire office equipment, we see a public outcry, which then restricts members of parliament from doing their duties. So these are some things that we need to think about in terms of these awards, right? All the members of parliament who are getting facilitated today have done something very, very remarkable, which is they have contributed to the parliamentary process without too much support, right? So asking all these questions is not easy if you don't have somebody writing questions for you. And members of parliament have other impositions on their time. There are constituents coming to meet them, there are press people coming to meet them, and in between all of that, they have been able to ask these many questions, also attend parliament, also engage in debates. So that's something to be commendable, and I think that's what's happening with the Sansad Ratna Awards today. I'm going to stop here. Hopefully I've left about another 10 minutes of questions, and I'm happy to answer these questions okay.
Sir, just a clarification.
Sir.
That is no doubt that Dr. Swami was sent abroad to explain the things remaining in India during emergency. But I was part of the underground movement and also coordinating the Lok Sanghar Samiti. Dr. Swami did attend parliament, raised the point of order. When he was speaking, he was having his hand in his trouser pocket. So Om Mehta shouted that he is going to bomb. So in the commotion, he immediately went out of parliament and went again to abroad. And I know the people who facilitated all these things. So there was no proxy. He did appear in the parliament.
I completely agree with you, sir. As I couched my statement on multiple occasions by saying that those were difficult times, I was only narrating as to what the parliament record said.
I was privy to the
I completely agree with you.
information.
Yeah.
So that is why I
Yeah.
clarified.
Thank you, sir.
I have a genuine issue as a citizen. How do I make attempting ask proper questions in the parliament to create the necessary
Absolutely, sir.
Have
And
you understood?
yes, sir, I have understood. A number of people actually do that. So I know of a number of organizations who work in the area of differently abled people who have been approaching members of parliament to raise issues around such people in parliament. So what you need to do is, let us say if there is a subject that you are passionate about, or that is your area of expertise, you can research that comprehensively, present it to your member of parliament, and you can also give him some kind of a loose format as to what you want to ask.
Is there any place where I can get the news format?
Yes, sir. If you go to the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha website, they have all the questions and answers that have been answered in Parliament. So you will get a sense of as to how the question is asked. The website is loksabha.nic.in and rajyasabha.nic.in. There's a question here. We started in 2005 by doing it for members of parliament. Members of parliament is a slightly smaller group, about 800 people. So it's slightly easier to do. MLAs is about 4,000 MLAs in the country, spread across 28 states and 2 union territories, so it's a little difficult. Absolutely. We do provide research support to MLAs also. Yes, sir.
I work as private job. We don't complete our time. We work overtime, we work over the weekend and so why that doesn't apply to us? The 100 questions, only 20 can be answered. Why not convert the sheet to a written question or have extra hours in the day and complete this?
Well, actually, any oral question which is not answered is actually converted into a written question and the answers are given, right? But you have to understand that there's a difference between a private company and an institution which is trying to oversee the working of the government, right? So there's not a like-to-like comparison, right? A much better comparison would be, are they being able to effectively utilize the time that they have? And that's a question that we need to ask members of parliament, and I think there are a number of members of parliament. You'll get an opportunity to engage with them, so hopefully they'll be able to answer it for you. Sir.
Yeah, can you get back to the slide where you showed the number of questions people were raising? The next one.
Yeah.
I just had a thought, you just correct me if I'm wrong. Let's assume that the Shiv Sena has asked 569 questions and the AITC has asked 41 questions. Could I assume that the people representing AITC already know a lot of things? I mean, or they're well read probably in the sets that are being discussed in Parliament, and Shiv Sena people are not that very clear, that's why they're raising questions. Could this kind of a perspective be given to the number of questions being raised?
No, not really. The raising of questions is not to increase your knowledge of the subject. The raising of the question is so that you can ask the government as to what the government is doing on those issues. Right? I'm happy to answer this again when we break for tea. Yeah.
And nothing provided for research support. Is anything being done at the central level where this is going to change for the future? Because you have people, you have students, you have everybody who wants to do research and probably help in the, in the governance. I know there are 1 or 2 fellowships at the max. Is there anything that's being thought of at a grand scale?
Nothing that I'm aware of. You have to understand that there's a big boundary line between what the government does and what Parliament does, right? Parliament will not accept research support from government because then it's going to be biased, right? So ideally, Parliament should be building institutional capacity on their own to do these certain things. I am not aware of if Parliament is doing anything of that sort currently.
You have a land fellowship. That's a project in the whole country.
Great. I just have time for one more question, and I think then Susan's. Yeah.
You have said that the MPs were primarily involved in 4 things. Do you mean to say all these things are carried out according to these broad outlines?
No, sir. I must clarify. I did not say The Constitution says that they're supposed to do 4 things, right? And I am not too sure if there is empirical evidence to point out as to the effectiveness of their doing things or not. I think we are running out of time. I'm happy to answer more questions that people have during tea break. Susan, yeah. Thank you for listening to me. Hopefully I'll get an opportunity to interact with all of you during tea and lunch. As I said, if you need more of this data, it's all available on our website. You can actually track the performance of every single member of parliament. If you want to track Sachin Tendulkar's performance, I can tell you right now he's been otherwise occupied with his cricketing duty, so he doesn't come to parliament right now. But short of that, you'll find data on every member.